For several of these teams, they were not expecting to play past Week 18. For others, this is a gigantic disappointment. But for all of them, major questions lie ahead. So, what is in store for the teams here in the postseason, or not in the postseason, as we get ready for the offseason? For the last time in a bit, let's talk about the teams that didn't make the postseason. And we'll do one of these every week for the teams that get eliminated as we trickle down toward a Super Bowl champion in 1 month's time. We will, going by draft order, it is the Tennessee Titans who will have the first overall pick. I think genuinely their biggest need is quarterback. And a lot of times I have got on teams for drafting quarterbacks just because they have the first overall pick, and well, we're not going to be drafting this high again, so we have to be taking a quarterback. How can we not? When you just kind of ignore that you aren't ready for that. I do think that this team is ready for a quarterback to come in and make an immediate impact and show immediate signs of growth. I think they have enough weapons around. They have invested in the offensive line. It still probably needs some work, and that is something that is going to be, I think, addressed as it goes on. But quarterback, I think, is the number one need for this team. And so that is going to be probably the focus of the draft. And then it gets into bigger, does Shadeur and Deion Sanders want to go to Tennessee and all of that? And bigger questions around that. They do probably need one more, like, big-time wide receiver to help out with a Shadeur Sanders, and that's one where if Shadeur goes there and then they kind of give in and just, oh yeah, Deion, come on in. If they do end up going that way, maybe that entices a T. Higgins to come, and then all of a sudden you are set. The defense, I do think, also needs a little bit of work. They brought in a lot of veteran players to help out on the defensive side of the football, and I think a lot of them kind of packed up shop for the year as the season went on. So I think there are maybe a few more holes on this defense than we thought there were going to be. So that's going to be something else. So this isn't a team that is one quarterback away from contending for a championship. But I do think that this, if they get the quarterback piece right, this is going to be the last time they draft this high for a very, very, very long time, because there are some pieces to build around out there in Tennessee. Cleveland, it's a little bit more bleak and a little bit more of an awkward situation because on the one hand, if you had a season like that and a season like they have had the last couple of years, then there is no question that they are going quarterback at this point in the draft, right? Like there's no way around it. You are obviously 100% going to be doing that. But you have Deshaun Watson under contract, and if you cut Deshaun Watson, the dead cap hit is $172 million, which is, I don't have to tell you, a whole lot of money. Let's just take a look here real quick. 2025 NFL salary cap. What is the NFL salary cap going into this season? Oh, $272 million. Now, there are ways around that, obviously. Teams have gotten creative with it before. I don't think Deshaun Watson is going to help them in any way, make life easy for them. So they have a decision to make. If they go the Denver route, they just cut Deshaun Watson and just have to fill out a 52-man or 53-man roster with $100 million, then that's the way they are going to go. And then they draft a Cam Ward, who did a lot with not a ton of help out in Miami, and just roll with it that way. I could see them, because a lot of the rumbling out of Cleveland is that they're going to stick with Deshaun Watson. And so when you look around the rest of the team, like I still think Jerome Ford isn't bad, but they probably need another running back. Wide receiver, though, they feel all right with Jerry Jeudy, and like Tillman's okay. Like maybe they need another wide receiver there. Probably they do. They certainly need some offensive line help. But another aspect of it, this defense got just pummeled this year. And that was supposed to be the real strength of this team, coming off of a couple of seasons ago where they had the best defense in the National Football League. That there are a few impact players high up in the draft on the defensive side. And so maybe you pair one of the fantastic edge rushers in this draft with a Myles Garrett, and you just have an absolute force there. But I think the focus now, if you aren't going to get rid of Deshaun Watson, is trying to maximize what you have there. And so the offensive line needs work. And you probably need another playmaker on the offensive side of things to help grow that team. And then the defense does have a few holes to plug there. So again, they're another team where it's everything, basically. The Giants, really, it is everything. The offensive line is horrendous. They don't have a quarterback. They have one wide receiver and basically a pass rush. But that's it. Like, this is a team almost starting from scratch right now. I like that they kept Dayball. I like that they kept Joe Shan. There's going to be a lot of pressure on them. If Cleveland doesn't go quarterback, then they are absolutely going with Cam Ward. And then the next however many picks they have in this draft all need to be offensive linemen, basically. Because it is so bad there. And like, I don't think Daniel Jones is very good, but no one could have been behind that offensive line out in New York. So they have to, that has to be the number one priority, is to get that offensive line figured out, and then probably, honestly, another weapon for the quarterback. Like, the defense isn't very good, but I kind of think if you are going quarterback, I don't want to say you have to punt on defense this year, because that's just not how this league works, but defense has to be, I think, the third priority for these guys. They have to get that kind of taken care of. The offensive line, certainly, and then maybe another weapon to work with. But you have Neighbors, and I think Tracy's something. So you have at least a little bit there. The offensive line has to be the main focus after they address the quarterback position in New York. The New England Patriots win on the last day of the regular season, so they'll be drafting 4th overall. They have the quarterback spot figured out. It's the everything else that needs help. The offensive line was, there aren't a whole lot of stats that I think are awesome for the offensive line. So just ye old eye test wise, worst offensive line in the National Football League, and by a lot. And that's saying something, because we just talked about the Giants and they're very bad. But the offensive line has to be addressed for the New England Patriots, or else Drake May is just going to get annihilated back there. And he does need a lot of help at receiver. I don't think that they Booty came up with a couple of big plays late in the season, but he still feels like he should be, he and Demario Douglas should be their 3-4 next year at wide receiver. They need to get a legitimate number 1 and then a good number 2 for this team to be able to do anything, I think. Defensively, they took a real big step back, but as we just talked about with the Giants, I think because you have this franchise quarterback, the main focus needs to be offense. They have enough good players on the defensive side that I think they can kind of mask their way to maybe getting back to a good defense if you don't have Jacoby Brissett turning the ball over all the time at the beginning part of the season. Very interesting team at 5 in Jacksonville. They have the quarterback, obviously, in Trevor Lawrence. I say obviously, but it is starting to feel like maybe they don't. That is a big concern, what's happened out there. They've never really given him a true number 1 at receiver. And so that, I think, has to be the main focus for this team this year. But then, again, the offensive line wasn't spectacular. And defensively, they got a couple of guys who can who can rush the passer, but they don't have a whole lot in that secondary. And so that they are one of the first teams that I think really has to address the defensive side. Again, for the 3rd team in a row, getting weapons for your quarterback is going to be of high importance, because that is something you've invested a lot of time into. But after that, it's not, and the offensive line and this and that. It is, let's go out and get some guys who can actually defend the pass, and maybe we won't have one of the more disappointing seasons in the league again next season. The Vegas Raiders get some luck with a few teams winning on Sunday, so they draft at 6. The need for a quarterback is obvious. They are also, unless they trade up, which I think they are in a very real spot to do that, they are not in an obvious spot to draft a quarterback. This would be significantly too high to reach on one of the other quarterbacks who are going in this draft. The good thing for them is they have significant needs everywhere. They don't have a number 1 wide receiver. Jacoby Myers is fine, and then the rest of them are just kind of, there's nothing, really. There were some intriguing pieces, but there's nothing there, really, to work with. They have the tight end. They got that figured out. Offensive line, I still think that needs to be addressed, and the whole, not the whole defense. The linebacking core is actually all right. With Spillane, Diablo can make some plays at times, but Max Crosby as well. like elite pass rusher. They gave a whole lot of money to Wilkins, the defensive tackle, and he gets hurt. So that sets it back a little bit. So maybe a healthy him and the defense isn't quite as bad, but the offense, like they got no help from the run game. They have no wide receivers, and the secondary has some real issues. So again, the Raiders are a team that just has a swath of issues, and I don't know what the obvious answer is at quarterback for them. They may have to take a roll of the dice, and like that honestly, that might be like a Zach Wilson team, because it's too early to go for it in the draft. And like Aiden O'Connell, I don't think is it. Maybe you take another year with him and you're just kind of awful next year going into the draft. But it's too early to go quarterback there for the Raiders. At 7, it's the New York Jets. Obviously, a lot of it hinges on what Aaron Rodgers does. Although it would be funny if he said he'd stick around and then they reach on like Jalen Milroe at 7. But I don't think that's going to happen. They had some offensive line issues. That was, I think, pretty obvious. And Aaron Rodgers is not a guy who can dance around with that anymore. So that is something that needs to be addressed, I would say. And then, like, that they have Sauce Gardner in the secondary, but not a whole lot after that. And the pass rush, I don't think, was quite as good as they needed it to be this season. So they have, again, as you would expect, a 5-12 team. They have a lot of holes. They're just in a unique spot where they have some elite options at a number of different spots. And so drafting at 7, like, you could get kind of a difference maker still with how quarterback heavy the top part of this draft is going to be. And you can get probably a very, very solid, like, you're going to get probably a top 5 player because 2 non-top 5 guys are going to go in the top 3 probably. You're going to get a top 5 player in this draft and then be able to fill out some of those holes that they have out in New York. At number 8, it is the Carolina Panthers. The offensive line, again, is something that I think we need to discuss here. Bryce Young just didn't have a whole lot of time at various points this season. So I think offensive line should be a focus. They've just taken such big swings at receiver. I think you kind of have to go with a more established one now, instead of just taking a big swing in the draft. And the draft now can be a bit of a focus on the defense, which was abysmal this season, and start to give your young quarterback a bit of a chance. But again, the big thing there is that Bryce Young is a guy of the future, and now you can start to build around it. At 9, it's New Orleans. They genuinely are a team that feels like I don't know what spot you can look at on New Orleans and be like, you know what? We're set. Because like on the defensive side, Chase Young is probably going to leave. Cam Jordan turns 36 this summer. They declined the 5th-year option on a former first-round pick, Peyton Turner. Like there's everything you look at on this team. It's okay, well, Alvin Kamara's kind of old. Chris Olave is great, but a gigantic injury concern around him as he has had a number of debilitating concussions. And then defensively, like they played well at times, but I don't think we're going to have another defensive-minded coach going in there. So it is a lot. And again, this team has kicked the can down the road salary cap-wise. They find a way to do it every single year, but they do not have any money to go out and spend on any of these positions right now. So I would imagine Derek Carr stays. I would imagine Kamara stays. And you hope that Olave comes back. Shaheed continues to build a bit of a chemistry there with Derek Carr. And you start to maybe supplement some of the things on the defensive side. And then they are a team that I think early second round, if everyone does what they're supposed to, which they won't, but if one of those quarterbacks is still there in the second round, I think that this is a very good, like, Jalen Milroe landing spot or somewhere along those, someone like that, as kind of their, this didn't work out, but their Will Levis in the second round. I think that would be probably a pretty good one there for them. At 10, it's the Chicago Bears. This one, again, is so obvious it's offensive line. It is that is the only focus of this team this year. The defense played really well. And like maybe there are a couple of little holes that you could fill, but that defense played really, really well. Offensively, Moore has a bad fumble when they're trying to ice the game away against Green Bay, but then he comes up with a big catch. Keenan Allen probably isn't going to stick around, but I think Rome Odunze is going to be really good. The running backs were what they were, but the offensive line was atrocious. And Caleb Williams was running for his life. And they couldn't, like, that Sunday night game early in the year where the Texans were just getting pressure rushing 5 every time. You can't allow that all the time if you are the Bears and you have such an investment at the quarterback position. So offensive line is priority 1, 2, and 3 for this team. For the San Francisco 49ers, it feels like a bit of a surprise, but the defensive side of the football is the focus. They have a lot of talent on that side, but as we saw this season, they have a lot of aging talent on that side. And so now there needs to be a bit of a pipeline filling in behind the Nick Bosa's and the Hargraves, and all of that. And there's going to be some changes in the secondary. Charvarius Ward and Isaac Yadam's contracts are up. So those are a couple of guys that they're going to need to fill in for. So it's the defensive side of the football that needs the work on the San Francisco 49ers. For the Dallas Cowboys, it was weird because there were so many injuries on the team this season. So it's tough to get a true read on where everyone is at on Dallas. They probably need some secondary offensive weapons. Like Zeke Elliott gets cut. Rico Dowdle is a free agent. So like there are a lot of very talented running backs. I think that would be too high to go running back here. To go with, what's his name? Genty, the kid out of Boise State. That might be a little bit high. There's some interior offensive line issues. Like this team was known for having one of the best offensive lines in the league, and they just didn't this year. So that is, again, another team that needs to focus on that side. And then defensively, they just were so banged up this year, and no one stepped up. So, like, yes, you're going to be getting a lot of reinforcements back, but I think it also shows you that a lot of depth is needed at those positions. That might be a little bit more of a backfill thing for Dallas, and maybe something they address a little bit more in free agency. But the offensive line, I think, is a main priority. For the Miami Dolphins, the defensive side of the ball was not what it needed to be. And they have a lot of guys leaving in free agency this year. They have a lot that I think needs to be addressed there. Offensively, we'll see what happens with Tyreek Hill, and maybe they go a little bit younger there and try to make a move. And they probably need a sturdy backup quarterback behind Tua, because what we saw this year, what they had wasn't it. And I didn't even mind trying with like a guy like Huntley because of the success that he had briefly coming in for Lamar. And then the more he played, the worse it got. But they really do need to focus on the defensive side of the ball because it wasn't good this year. And a lot of the good players are on their way out. At 14, it is the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, they kind of need to figure out Anthony Richardson, and that, I think, figures out the rest of the offense. Maybe a little bit of work on the interior of the offensive line, but they need to get Anthony Richardson figured out. But it's the defense. Like, this defense has been comically bad for 2 seasons now. That needs to be addressed in a big-time way for this group to be successful. But they feel like they're right there. Like they do genuinely feel like a team that is on the cusp. It felt bad because of how this season went. The Atlanta Falcons at 15. You gave up 38 points in regulation to the Carolina Panthers. Defense needs to be addressed here. Offensively, like, Kyle Pitts isn't what we thought he was going to be yet. Maybe he turns into it, but it's getting a little late for that. Bijan Robinson, though, was awesome. Drake London was great. And I think the secondary pass catching options for the Falcons with McLeod and Mooney showed that they can really step up and help what will probably be Michael Penix Jr. next season. It's the defensive side that needs a lot of work. They made a couple of big moves right at the start of free agency, or right at the start of the season, the end of free agency, I guess, to try to shore up that defense. And as the season went on, it just didn't work. So that is the main focus of this team that needs to be addressed. Same with the Arizona Cardinals. Defensively, this team was just not good enough this season. And like they have a couple of good players on the defensive side, which is an upgrade from the none they had a season ago. And like maybe there needs to be a little bit more help on the offensive line, and maybe another pass catching option around McBride and whatever Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to turn into. But I like the depth they have at running back. It is all focused, I think, on defense for Arizona. And same thing with Cincinnati. This defense cost them an opportunity at playing for the postseason. So defense, like it has to be better out there. They do need a better offensive line. That part is not in doubt. That the offensive line was not good enough, even with Joe Burrow balling out. That's something that needs to be addressed. And then you have the T. Higgins stuff, and maybe I don't think Io Shavas is the answer as your number 2 pass catching option out in Cincinnati. So for a team that finished 9-8 on the cusp of a playoff spot with an MVP level quarterback, there's actually quite a few holes for Cincinnati to fill. For the Seahawks, I don't think there's a lot of holes that they need to fill. That the offensive line is awful. And so that needs to be addressed, and in a significant manner, because Geno Smith, it's the final year of his contract, but he showed he is still a good quarterback. They have 3 legitimate receivers that you trust, 2 running backs that I think you trust, and a lot of youth on the defensive side of the football that got better as the season went along and as everyone got healthier. So maybe a little bit more depth on the defensive side, but the offensive line has to be the focus for the Seattle Seahawks this year. So that is the offseason primer for the teams that have now entered the offseason.